The final paper of the evening is from Linda and Stanley. Again, really love your writing. I was so thrilled when you submitted a paper. So the paper's called Reserve Voices, American Indian Leadership in Education. So Linda.
So first I want to introduce ourselves. Hama Reina Waka. My name is Linda Warner. I'm a member of the Comanche tribe of Oklahoma, and I and Stan this afternoon are in Northeast Oklahoma on the contested lands of the Mia tribe. And Stan is a student of mine. And so we work together on a lot of things. He does a lot of research for me, and it's a way of thinking about Indigenous education and the intergenerational sharing of knowledge. And so he's a partner of mine on a lot of things that I write nowadays. And we really look forward to sharing some information about some work that we recently did with distance education. The reason we picked reserved voices is because we sit on what is now the largest federal reservation in this country. The Supreme Court ruled a year ago that the entire eastern half of Oklahoma was a federal reservation, and that had not changed from, 100 years ago. So, so we picked reserved voices because we're actually going to talk about education on reservations. Next slide, please.
So the man on the left is Tom Torlino. He was a Navajo. And that is a picture of him before he went to Carlisle Boarding School, which is a boarding school that was opened in 1876 in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And the slide on the right, picture on the right, is the same man after his assimilation at Carlisle boarding school. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the scope of the history of boarding schools in the United States. And note on the right-hand corner, the 12 church-affiliated denominations operated in boarding schools along with the federal government. Next slide, please. Okay. Today, the funds, the BIE funds 183 schools in 23 states. 130 of these are tribally controlled. On the left side are the states where most of these schools are located. The BIE operates 53 of these schools. Next slide, please. Okay. This slide is a graphic of issues found in boarding schools in 1928. And these are the same issues that are still found from a more recent study of Indian education. Next slide, please.
Okay, so what we want to talk to you about today is leadership in the current Bureau of Indian Education schools, and particularly during the pandemic. We just did a series of 53 interviews with the administrators of the 53 schools that are currently operating in Indian country. Now, the Bureau of Indian Education only educates about 38,000 American Indian students. So the bulk of the American Indians in this country actually go to public schools. But the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Bureau of Indian Education sit within inside of the Department of Interior. And the Government Accounting Office reports on the performance of different departments. And we didn't list all of these reports, but of all the federal agencies, the Government Accounting Office reports that Interior is the worst performing federal agency in the country. And within Interior, the Bureau of Indian Education is the worst performing federal agency. Next slide, please. So from 2005, we've been looking at what we call the Tadenapper-Warner model of leadership. And what we expected to find in these interviews was really the middle circle, the Tiktaanawapa, which is somebody who speaks for us at all times. That wasn't exactly what we found. We really found more evidence of the Mahimiwapa, which is the role model, as we look through these different, did the content analysis on these 53 interviews. Next slide, please. Oops, next slide. So to set the context for the interviews, I wanted to talk really about the pandemic. We set these interviews up and they were originally scheduled to be face-to-face interviews on all of these sites. However, once the pandemic hit, we were not able to travel. Lots of these reservations closed down. And one of the reasons are often, I think you'll see in the news, where American Indians were hit really hard with the pandemic. And so even though the reservations were totally closed, it's taken a significant toll on the schools, the delivery of educational services, and the people on those reservations. A lot of reservations are specific geographic areas. And so, for example, the Navajo reservation, when they want to lock it down, basically they just close access, just as if they're a country. These are small sovereign nations within the United States. And this slide really talks about why they were so highly impacted by the COVID virus. Next slide. So in spring of 2021, we started, like I said, this set of interviews with school administrators. And from these quotes, you can see that what we found was, like in the first one, there was a lot of trouble with getting equipment to these places. So there are lots of issues in the sense that school districts on reservations often did not have faculty who were trained to use technology, particularly in boarding schools where there would have been no reason to have technology, even really cell phones, because students lived there all the time. So when they had to start purchasing all this equipment and delivering it out, there were lots of issues with the weather, the cell service, the internet connectivity. If you had a computer delivered to a home and there were actually 3 or 4 kids in the home, they couldn't all be on at the same time. So if they were all in different grades, it was basically a huge mess. So the Bureau initially started by delivering paper packets to people. The bus drivers would go out on Mondays, pass out the work that was due that week, and then pick it up on Fridays and deliver the next set. So in the first quote, the New Mexico administrator was complaining about purchasing equipment and getting it there. And so, of course, when the whole country, in fact, the whole world is now trying to move to online delivery of things, laptops are going to be hard to come by. And so, but this is all kind of wrapped up in the Bureau's bureaucratic layers of who gets to purchase, what they get to purchase, how they have to bid for things. And so this gentleman was saying, we spent all this time trying to get ourselves in order. Then when we get them, they're the wrong thing and we have to send them back and nobody knows where these computers go. And so even though they initially shut schools in March of 2021, or excuse me, 20, then it was sometimes almost 9 months in some cases before they were able to get equipment to students. In the other quote that I'm sharing with you, it's talking about getting teachers on board to deliver distance education. And again, many of these people had been working in schools for 20, 25 years, hadn't been back to school, had never taken a class online. They didn't know how to work with the learning management systems. There was a whole lot of like a learning curve that went directly vertical. They just really were not about it. In both of these quotes, though, the thing that I think is most interesting is both administrators are trying to blame somebody else. And so that really, to me, speaks to the kind of leadership that they have at the local school level and how toxic this organization is really in general. Next slide, please. We're providing our email addresses. If you want more information about this and the particular study, I can send you the distance learning education study as well. The Bureau just released it like within the last week. And then the last slide is, yeah, we're just saying thank you for your time in every different language that you can find in Oklahoma. So we'll stop there and kind of see what's going on with you guys.
That's a beautiful way to end. Thanks both for this. So you've probably guessed that it was important to us to start the conference anchored around particularly 2 papers on Indigenous experiences, but we also wanted to bring Fidel's perspective in as well to raise some voices that don't usually get heard as much as they should at these conferences. So I've really learned a lot from this presentation and from Michelle's earlier. And I would just, so I can see Keith has got his hand up. So as always, I'll defer to Keith Grint before coming in myself.
Thank you. Am I on?
You're on.
I'm on. Great. Okay. Thanks, Linda Sue. And 2 questions which relate to each other. The first one was, I mean, I know a little bit about the topic that you're talking about, and from my little understanding of it, what you're describing has been going on for generations in different contexts. And I just wonder whether there has been any significant change across those generations, and if there has, what explains that change? And the second one, which relates to that, is whether the problem lies at the level of the reservation, or whether the problem lies at the level of the bureaucracy, the bureau, or whether it lies between those 2 groups, and everybody is involved in this.
Thank you. I think that's one of the reasons that we showed you the sort of general slide of the Merriam Report, 1928. And if you historically look at Bureau education or Indian education in this country, if you look at the Merriam Report and then you later look at the Kennedy Report and then the Indian Nations at Risk, they all pretty much say the same thing. The significant difference is in the 1970s, the Supreme Court ruled that the Bureau of Indian Education, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Indian Health Service could use Indian preference in hiring. So prior to that time, the people who ran schools were all white, basically, right? They were your typical, stereotypical Indian agent, if you will, and very bureaucratic, like Pratt in the example we showed you of the Carlisle boarding school, right? Coming out of a history of, Indian Affairs was first under the War Department in this country. So coming out of that kind of history where you had soldiers who were running, who were the land agents, who were the school superintendents and the agency superintendents. Well, in the 1970s, with the Supreme Court ruling that they could use Indian preference, the Bureau then had to hire American Indians if there was a vacancy. So if you were minimally qualified for a position, like you're a school principal, and you apply for a position and Keith Grint applies and he's got a doctorate, the person who's hiring, the hiring official, doesn't even see your name, Keith. He just sees the Indian's name who's minimally qualified. And so right now, the Bureau, from the top pretty much down through the janitors in the place, are very rarely non-Indian. So you would think that would be enough of a cultural change to really impact the delivery of services. And when we look at the teacher interviews that we did, you'll see a very different tone in the teacher interviews. They talk about caring about kids. And oftentimes in the, when we were doing our debriefs with the research team, I would say, we can't put this in the report because this teacher can get fired for doing this. You know, they did all these workarounds to get stuff to kids, to make sure kids had the opportunity to not get so far behind. But they were doing things that would probably get them fired in this kind of a toxic organization. So we had to be very careful how we treated the data that we collected. And I guess I'll stop there. I kind of, you kind of got me on a on a tirade there.
Does that imply a continuing level of pessimism or optimism?
Oh, well, see, here's the thing. I have 23 years of federal service in the Bureau of Indian Affairs Education, whatever they wanted to call themselves. And, you know, at one time in this country, Ma Bell had a slogan, "The system is the solution," you know. And we've all studied bureaucracies enough to know that a pure bureaucracy is a well-oiled machine. So I kept thinking you could fix it from the inside. I'm pretty sure that's not going to happen. I think, along with a lot of people, that the Bureau should let these kids go to public schools where at least they wouldn't be any worse off than they are right now. I mean, the academic scores, the tests, the stuff that they do with these kids, they actually take giant steps backwards sometimes. So it's a very complex, mixed up system. In fact, even doing this research project, we got 2/3 of the way through it before the central office told us, you've got to have OMB clearance on your family survey. For the first 9 months of the 12 months we worked on this, we didn't need OMB clearance. But then they changed lawyers along the way, and now all of a sudden we do, which of course pushed us way behind timelines and stuff. So it's a very complex, difficult organization to work in.
Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Okay, we've got a couple of questions in the chat. So Michelle says, thanks for the powerful presentation, Linda, Sue, and Stan. I think that the role model type speaks to the point you're making. What does that role model example look like? As a bureaucrat, as teacher who hasn't done professional development for the past 2 decades, question mark. The bureaucracy is keeping things in place. Any thoughts on that?
Well, in the, you know, I guess we only shared really to make our point, but the majority of the discussion that we had with administrators was negative. There was, however, some positive things. And so in both cases, I guess that's why we ended up thinking that it was really more of the role model component of the leadership model, because we did have school administrators who were taking equipment out to families. They weren't just sending people out. You know, it wasn't just the bus driver who was delivering things. The administrator, him or herself, would go out to families and try to set up the Khajiits and help the kids get online and try to show the parents how to do things. So I guess that's why we went with role model, because there was enough of that to make us think that it wasn't. And also because we predicted it would be one who speaks for us at all times, but they weren't moving into those other areas. And I think that was because during the pandemic, there was just the crisis. So there wasn't really the opportunity to move into those others, which is more like a situational leadership model kind of thing.
So does anybody else have a question? I was going to bring something up about water. No. Okay. So this might be a bit left field, but I was reading. It's a few sort of disconnected things I wanted to bring together. So what Bridget Carroll was saying in her keynote earlier about the role of the river in Maori spirituality and culture, and then also some of the reading I've been doing around the Standing Rock reservation and clearly similar resistance movements rooted in ecology and cultural traditions as well. And it struck me when you were talking that so many of the difficulties and struggles that you're talking about also relate to water. And I'm just wondering if there's something with water here that connects a broader struggle or a broader issue.
I'm going to maybe go back at least to the 5,000 foot level and say it's really more of the struggle with the culture itself and the ability of communities to actualize their culture within a school district. And we found that a really wide variance across the schools that the Bureau operated. Now, what we're talking about this afternoon are Bureau operated schools. They're the ones that the federal government operates. The tribes operate 130 schools that the Bureau funds. They just give them a check, go run your school, okay? And in those schools, there is way more culture, way more language, way more connection to community and the sort of holistic kinds of things you're talking about where everything's interconnected and working together. And those schools actually, in one of them, within a month, every kid in that school was connected to the internet. I mean, they just moved us because they don't have to go through government procurement requirements. They can just go like to Best Buy and buy all their equipment if they want to and set it up. So they have way more opportunities to actually work with kids in those tribally controlled schools.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. So it's just striking, isn't it? And like on one level, how I've heard arguments that COVID is in some ways a rehearsal for what will happen as climate crises intensify. But I guess as you Keith, have already said, these things have actually been going on forever and ever. So. Michelle has made some more comments that I want to read out. It really distresses and traumatizes to have generations of young people's education managed in this way. Thank you for bringing this to our attention, Linda and Stan. Indigenous-led example shows the difference. So I just wanted to draw that to your attention. Does anyone else have a point or a question?
Well, I guess I would like to say thank you to everyone for allowing us to join the conference. And also, the leadership of this conference has allowed us to have an Indigenous voice for some time. And I've really appreciated that.
That's really nice of you to say. Yeah, no, that's absolutely wonderful. So Stan, you sure you don't want to share something with us?
No, I think my grandmother hit the nail on the head.
I didn't know that Linda Sue was your grandmother. Now I do know that.
I'm pretty sure Keith knew.
Okay. Hey, well, look, it's great for you to submit to our conference. We're really grateful you did so. And thanks to all the presenters tonight as well. Thanks ever so much. So tomorrow morning, we are, I guess, continuing a very similar conversation in many ways, because we've got Helena Liu, who is a really, really fabulous writer on the experiences of particularly Chinese Australian people in dealing with leadership, and somebody who's spoken very powerfully from a perspective of feminism as well. So tomorrow morning, she's going to be talking about justice, solidarity, and love. That kicks off at 8 a.m. UK time. I can't translate that into different time zones, but you can look it up anyway. Everything will be recorded and shared anyway. And then we've got a full day of papers tomorrow. So thanks very much, everybody, for coming, for sticking with us. I hope you enjoyed this first half day of the conference, and we will see you tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.